So the Flotilla for Guards are the one with Greta Thunberg on board, claiming that they got hit by a drone off Tunisia. Well, it looked like they're actually in the harbour in Tunisia. The footage that people have seen and looked at sort of suggests that it was possibly a misfired flare from on board the vessel more than it was some sort of incendiary being dropped from a yet to be determined drone. Some of the stuff where they were complaining about drones overflying them earlier was because they'd entered territorial waters of other nations that weren't quite sure who or what they were, so had gone out to have a look, kind of to be expected. But if you were to listen to the people on board, it was some sort of major existential threat to what they were planning to do. And so the first vessel kind of on fire. Now, the second attack in as many days. I think this is still the same vessel that was, I think this is the same case about it burning. And one of the things that sort of stands out is, okay, they've got a vested interest to play up the danger of what took place, or to play up there being a big, scary agency chasing after them, and therefore it helps raise funds because people feel bad about what's going on, all that sort of stuff. Well, the truth is often hidden about what goes on. Now, the fact that they had footage from on board the ship of what was happening kind of led people to quickly go, actually, that looks like a flare more than anything else. It doesn't look like something was dropped from another thing. Now, yep, the Tunisians said, look, no, what was claimed was wrong, and they've obviously decided they don't like Israel at all, therefore it's all Israel's fault. Now, we're going to be looking at, as we go through the rest of these articles today, the problem of damaging inflammatory rhetoric and how it's now has unfortunately led in the last day or so to some very sad outcomes for some people. And there needs to be a rationalisation. There needs to be a bit of self-reflection by people who are pushing a lot of this rhetoric. They need to stop and consider what happens if people commit to action of what they've said, and or whether they are willing to accept the consequences for actions, or basically even for their own words. Are they willing to accept consequences? Don't know. They're basically blaming Israel for reaching out and doing it. As some people pointed out, if Israel was going to reach out and attack something like that, the ship would not have been hit by something so small. There would have been a far more substantive outcome. And so misinformation spreads. And I mean, let's take Trump's statement from his first period in power as president, and the idea of fake news. Well, it clearly seems that the incidents here is likely fake news. People without the experience to understand what's going on have made rather salacious claims, and because they're the ones who are there, it's then been taken and run as gospel. It's a bit like sometimes when Sea Shepherd was heavily engaged in a lot of their activities that they were doing. Now, if you're not aware of who Sea Shepherd are, they're kind of like a more militant organisation focused on protecting the seas. They like to go after Japanese whaling fleets in particular, and I'm sure they've had a few other bits and pieces that they've targeted, but that's the one they like to be known for. And they're not about peaceful protest necessarily. They quite happily will throw butyric acid, the one that smells like rotten butter, um, onto the whaling ships. That they'll try to foul them with dragging lines through the water, try to interrupt the harvesting of the whales, etc., and will come very close to committing piracy under international law. And so that tends to obviously upset people, and it also attracts a type of militant environmentalist who sees that as appropriate action. The sort of environmentalist that will throw ground up pigs into pig feed, that are into pigs that are before pigs and sheep are headed for export to Islamic countries, live export. So it stops the live export because the animals have now had contaminated feed, but also as an attempt to have the receiving nation refuse them because they're no longer able to treat it as a halal product. That sort of thing. It would be like when the Rainbow Warrior was protesting French nuclear testing in the Pacific. That is considered peaceful compared to something like Sea Shepherd. All right, so something like this, where they're making an attempt to intentionally antagonize a sea blockade and things like this. Yeah, that's the sort of thing it seems like they're going for. They're going for that more extreme attempt and seemingly lack detailed understanding of laws of the sea, of national border security, I guess. And, well, I mean, there's no problem saying you've got support for a given people. Not an issue. But, yeah. um, hmm. That figure looks odd because I saw a UN figure the other day suggesting that the death count in Gaza was only on the order of 1,000 people, yet uh, Gaza's health ministry says over 64,000 have died. Okay, those two figures don't quite line up. And the first figure came from the UN. So, not that I trust them much either. But it's it's almost like the statement that came out recently about international genocide scholars have declared genocide in the Palestinian territories. And many news articles ran with it and said, oh, look, this is the gospel truth, where this is right, bad Israel and everything else. Very, very, very few stopped to consider what the source was, stopped to consider what or who the international IAGS were, International Association of Genocide Scholars. It turns out it's a random organization that people can just pay $30 to become a member of, and then that designates you a genocide scholar. And so they had an internal poll, and 3/4 of their respondents said, yes, it's a genocide. Now, I will give credit to them. They were open enough to identify how their membership voted. And so you're able to see, if not the outright ethnicity of who was voting for what, but at least get a rough guide as to the breakdown. So was it all European people? Was it all Westerners? Was it all people from Middle Eastern countries? Like, were there trends in how people had voted? Yeah, yeah, there were. But the funny thing is, none of the media that ran with it seemed to have the moral integrity to identify the relative strength or weakness of the source. it was telling that it dropped out of the media cycle very, very quickly, which suggests that at some point somebody went and had a look and went, this isn't a very high quality source. It was like, now I might get the organization wrong, but I believe it was Human Rights Watch. It's either them or somebody named very similar to them. For many years, it was a single person who was Human Rights Watch, and they were not present on the ground in any of the conflict zones or areas of unrest that they were covering and making the claims about. They were doing it from their own house in England and basing it on the media coverage that they'd seen, and I guess some of the reports coming out. So straight away, the limit of what they could accurately identify depends on the validity of the information receiving and the quality of the reports and coverage and everything else, which straight away is slanted. But because they had a decent sounding name and had sort of hung around for a while, they started gaining traction as a voice to be heard in this regard. It it was one of those things where even a cursory look as to who they were sort of was like, well, why do they have the credit that they do? I mean, if I was to listen to somebody explaining something about issues with migration, refugees, even illegal migration, I'd listen to the IOM, the International Organization for Migration. They are, well, they've come out of um, they've come out of, well, initially World War II, the migration patterns out of World War II. I think initially they might have been Red Cross or Red Cross aligned, but eventually they evolved to become the IOM and are a fairly formalized body. I mean, they help process refugee camps, they help process refugee claims, they help identify people who are likely to lodge refugee claims or identify people who are migrants in the process of migration. They've certainly helped in valid migration periods, and they've also been present with uh, people who'd be classed as illegal migrants. Their political slant or what they do exactly, some people may not like it, but they have respectability because of the decades that they've been involved doing this. And so if they say, oh, there's 20,000 people sitting here who are likely to attempt an illegal border crossing, yeah, you probably want to listen to that because it's probably been verified by going and seeing them, going and visiting them in whatever camps or sites that they're waiting on, and going from there. So yeah, it'll be interesting. Now, obviously, they finish up again the ABC article. We know which way they lean. It says, oh yep, the Israeli naval forces boarded and seized a British flag yacht back in June. Well, that was because they crossed the blockade line. Going to happen. It happened a few years ago with a Turkish ship that was attempting the same thing. People shouldn't be surprised by that.